What's driving China's aggression towards the West, and I should include Australia, and its overreaction to visitations to Taiwan by the likes of US Speaker Nancy Pelosi? Well, according to my next guest, it may be linked to Chinese leader Xi Jinping's deepening isolation and paranoia. In fact, he's been described today as the loneliest man in the world. Joining me now is the director of the China and Free Societies program at the Centre for Independent Studies, Salvatore Babones. Salvatore, thank you very much for your time. Why is Xi the loneliest person in the world to you?
He's the loneliest man in the world because he has no natural friends. We used to call the President of the United States the loneliest job in the world. Well, Xi Jinping has three jobs. He's the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, he's the president of China, and he's the chairman of the Central Military Commission of China. Well, that makes him judge, jury, and executioner of the entire Chinese system. Well, you don't have a lot of friends when you're putting all your friends in jail. You are lording it over them. You're dividing them amongst themselves, amongst each other. And your approach to governance is to divide and rule.
So creating drama over, for instance, Pelosi's visit, or a drama over disputed islands, for instance, this suits his domestic power struggle, does it?
I think it divides portions of Chinese society against each other in a way that benefits Xi Jinping at the center. I like to say he's not so much the center, the spider at the center of the web. He is the web at this point that holds the country together. Take Taiwan, for example. Much of Chinese industry depends desperately on Taiwanese capital, on Taiwanese expertise, and let's not forget, on Taiwan computer chips.
Yeah.
Cut those off, and those parts of Chinese society are really in trouble. It's not like there's one unified Chinese position on Taiwan or on any other issue.
So has Australia, do you think, been used by Xi incidentally to, solidify his position in Beijing?
Australia is not a major focus of Chinese foreign policy. Australia is an opportunity to score points in Chinese domestic policy. Remember when China was turning around Australian coal ships that were desperately needed for China's coal-fired power plants? Well, they were turning them around because of internal battles in China, not because of an external conflict with Australia. They were willing to suffer freezing in the winter as long as they could score political points vis-a-vis their opponents inside China. That's how deep the infighting is.
So just explain that a little bit more for me. What were the political points that Xi could score by denying his people the warmth in winter that they get from our coal?
There are different factions within China. Of course, there are groups that are very committed to expanding solar power in China. There are groups that are very committed to a nuclear future for China. Of course, the coal companies are all state-owned, which means they are power bases of their own. Those state-owned coal companies are not necessarily aligned with Xi Jinping on all issues. That is, they are very closely aligned with other power bases. Xi Jinping himself is most closely connected with a group out of Shanghai, but the groups that control the state-owned enterprises in the coal and steel belt are on an opposite political faction in China. The result is that internal infighting, in ways that are very opaque to us, it's very hard for us to know what's going on. I admit, I don't know what's going on. What I do know is that there is a lot of conflict inside China that gets reflected out into the rest of the world.
So this may not be all bad. It could mean that after November, after he's, probably re-elected, he might put down the gloves and make peace, not war, with the likes of Australia.
Well, let's not say re-elected. Let's say after he cements his position at the top, because, of course, there's no elections in China as such. Not even within the Communist Party, there aren't elections. I mean, there's a formal vote in on the Politburo, but that hardly counts as an election. After he cements his position, things might calm down. We'll see. The problem is that it really doesn't matter very much what his formal titles are. What matters is, can he stay in power? And Xi Jinping's problem is that he has no power base of his own. He rose to the top in China by being the blandest man in the country, by trying to have no enemies, not because he had so many friends. The theory among Western experts 10 years ago was that the result was that Xi Jinping would rule by consensus, that he would seek a kinder, gentler China that would be more open to the West. We've seen exactly the opposite. Unable to forge a consensus within China, he's consistently pitted power centers in China against each other to make sure that the opposition to his rule is fractured and at each other's throats. That's what keeps him in power. And that's why it's so dangerous for the rest of the world.
It's a fascinating insight, and more fascinating because we know very little about the inner workings and the operation of the government in Beijing.